Hi, everybody. Good evening. Um, Thank you for joining us, and welcome to this event, Climate Action for Busy People. My, yeah, yeah, everybody's so busy. My name is Felicia Jang. I am the Vice Chair of the Hideo Sasaki Foundation Board of Trustees. Thank you for being with us here tonight. We wanted to first acknowledge the land on which we are meeting this evening. Greater Boston occupies the unceded ancestral, traditional, and contemporary territory of the Massachusetts, Pawtucket, Wampanoag, and Nipmuc peoples who have stewarded this land for hundreds of generations. We extend our respect to citizens of these nations who live here today, their ancestors who have lived here for over 500 generations, and to all Indigenous people. And a quick note about the foundation. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit established in 2000 to continue the legacy of Hideo Sasaki. Hideo was a Japanese-American landscape architect who came of age in World War II. He was internationally respected as a designer, teacher, and mentor, and he founded Sasaki, which is where we are right now. And our mission at the Hideo Sasaki Foundation is to advance equity in design. Our research and grants support community-based organizations with funding and access to design expertise. Our public programming creates space for dialogues that highlight important topics of social justice and resilience. And our design education engages students in career exploration through internships, camps, and after-school programs. Tonight's event is part of our broader 2026 theme of Resilient Futures, which connects design with community-driven action. From climate change to systemic inequities to national and global political shifts, we're living in a time of increasing stress and change. So we're asking the question, how can the design community contribute to our collective resilience as we move into the future? And now I'd like to welcome our interviewer for the evening, Tamar Warburg. Tamar is an architect and Sasaki's director of sustainability. She works with Sasaki teams to develop sustainability and resilience goals appropriate for each project and access critical resources to reach those goals. She enjoys collaborating to integrate sustainability considerations throughout the design process, from preliminary programming through construction management practices. In this era of climate change, she believes that every project is an opportunity to make a healthy and resilient contribution to our clients, our communities, and our planet. Tamar.
Thank you. Thank you, Felicia. And I am honored to introduce Cate Mingoya-LaFortune. How did I do? Oh, great. Cate is Groundwork USA's Chief Officer of Climate Resilience and Land Use. Is that not an awesome job? It's amazing. She's a people-centered climate adaptation planner, community organizer, educator, parent, and cautious optimist. Raised in an environmental justice neighborhood, she's committed to furthering a future where all people can live in clean, thriving communities. She earned her BA in biology from Reed College, a Master of Science Education from CUNY-Layman, and a Master of City Planning from here at MIT. Is that what brought you to this area? MIT, great. She's the author of the recently released book, Climate Action for Busy People, and was named a 2024 Grist Fixer. So welcome, Cate. Yeah. So hello.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
What synergy between your work, what you're doing, and what the Hideo Sasaki Foundation is all about? I think it's amazing. And we would love to hear more from you about your path, your journey to being a community resilience activist and a change agent.
Well, thank you everyone for being here. It's great to see your faces and to get to meet you. I grew up in Queens, New York. If any of you are old enough to remember this show, The Nanny, that's where Fran Drescher's accent is from, like that part of Queens. And the neighborhood that I grew up in was sandwiched between two elevated expressways. It was also close enough to the Long Island Sound and the Bay that it would flood pretty frequently. So I, like all the other kids on my block, ended up in and out of the hospital a lot for asthma that was caused by the exhaust off of the expressway and the mold that would come from our basements. And like a lot of kids who grow up low income, I would constantly hear from the adults in my life, you got to go to school, you got to get a good job, and you got to go. And I was a pretty rule following child. And I was like, okay, those steps, I can do that. And I did that. I went and got a BA in biology from a school out in Portland, Oregon, and then came back to be a New York City public school teacher in neighborhoods that looked a lot like the ones that I grew up in. And I said the exact same things to my kids that I was teaching to the middle schoolers. You got to work hard, go to college, and you got to go. And embarrassingly, it took me about 5 years to figure out what an awful thing that is to say to a kid, to say you need to leave your family, you have to leave your language, you have to leave your culture, and you probably can't come back. And so I was thinking to myself, we're putting so much energy into the individual, trying to empower them to escape all that has made them who they are. What if we turned around and instead tried to put all of that energy, all of that money, all of that thoughtfulness and creativity into those communities? And so I decided to switch careers, and I came up to Metro Boston and went to MIT for city planning, where I mostly studied housing with some environmental stuff, but mostly housing. And worked for the state's public housing portfolio for a while as the director of policy and program development. And the pace of government's real slow, and it's supposed to be like that, right? It's supposed to give people an opportunity to intervene. But eventually I found my way to Groundwork, where I am now. We're a network of 21 people-centered environmental justice organizations. So I get to work right at that people-centered intersection of using land as a vessel for our values. How do we change the built environment and people's relationship to the built environment so that we're living those values of fairness, of equity, of inclusion, and of just letting a kid know, hey, the space where your family is okay to stay, and you don't have to leave, and you shouldn't be in danger from heat and poor air quality and flooding just because you're choosing to stay close to your mom.
So true. So you're now at Groundwork USA. Tell us a story about something you've worked on at Groundwork that helped inform your approach to the book.
Yeah. So one of the first projects that I worked on was our Climate Safe Neighborhoods Partnership, which works with residents, and it's still ongoing, to help residents understand, why do your communities look the way that they do? Like, why is one part of town hotter than the other? Why does one part flood while the other part's dry? And then work with residents so that they can prioritize the changes they'd like to see, and then help support them so that they understand the way that systems are structured so that they can intervene for a more equitable distribution of resources. So like your budgetary cycles and master planning processes, those places where decisions are made, but where low income people are often left out. And we were doing some door knocking in Richmond, Virginia, talking to folks about like, hey, how's heat going for you? Is it hot down here? And they say, of course it's hot. Yeah, it's Virginia. It's always hot. Climate change isn't really a thing. We're not particularly concerned about it. And then a little bit later, we would ask, well, has anything changed for you in the way that you engage in your community? And we had one woman say like, yeah, it's always been hot. I don't really believe in the climate crisis, but the temperatures do get so warm by 11 now that I can't stay out on the front porch with my neighbors. I have to go inside. And she was feeling really isolated. We spoke to other people in the community, and we're trying to talk to them about heat and flooding. But what they said to us was, our big concern is actually this street right here at the end of the block. The bus stop for our kids is on the other side, and the cars speed through, and there's no stop sign, and there's nothing that we can do. And then it also floods. So imagine being a parent trying to get your kindergartner, your first grader across the street. You're hoisting them onto your hip and then wading in your work clothes through shin deep water. That's pretty disgusting. So from a very technocratic perspective, oh, well, we should put a cistern in here and we need to improve the drainage. And we had all of these ideas that we brought. And the residents said, no, we just want trees here. And I said, well, tell us a little bit more. And the residents were interested in the trees because they thought that it would slow down the traffic of the cars, right? Trees can act as a traffic calming measure if they're planted straight enough. They were also interested in seeing if the trees would cast some shade, because if you've ever been in Virginia in May, June, July, it's incredibly hot. The school bus stop is on one side of the street. The bus that a lot of people took to go towards the city center for work is on the other side, and there's no shade structure. They wanted that shade. And the trees, when they got big enough, those mature roots were going to start to absorb rainwater. So we'd come in with this more, we were still asking and talking to folks, but with this more technocratic solution. But the people who'd lived there, who had experience dealing with the dangerous cars and the difficult walk across the street and the squishy wet shoes and the sweaty work shirt, were able to come up with a more elegant solution than we were able to. And so that is a big part of the value system that I bring to this work and that Groundwork brings to this work of people-centeredness and meeting people where they are, both figuratively and literally, hearing about their lived experience, because no one knows your neighborhood better than you do. And that was, I think, my first lesson in having that truly, truly be true. And now, actually, if you go to that part of Richmond, the trees have grown really nicely over the last 8 years. They cast shade, and it is not so sweaty when you're waiting for the bus.
That's a win.
It's such a win. Yeah.
Awesome. It's also a win from, and is it more of a win, the change itself, or the empowering of the community that was successful in advocating for the change?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we'd heard constantly from residents in that neighborhood was their hesitancy to engage in any type of process with any outside entity because of how frequently they'd been burned by the municipality. One of the other things that they'd been trying to get for a really long time was a stop sign on that block. And they apparently have been trying to do that for 10, 15 years. They'd call the municipality and they would get woven through that absolutely impenetrable phone tree of, I'm going to transfer you to someone who's going to transfer you to someone who's going to hang up on you. And so they didn't have a belief that this neighborhood, which is a very historic Black neighborhood, that there was ever going to be anyone who paid attention to them. So by being one of the first groups to say, like, well, you know, we can take care of the trees and we can interface with the city on the permitting process. And in addition to the trees, we can try to find whoever's in charge of stop signs, just showing that change was possible, changed the residents' approach to seeing themselves as a body that is solely responsible for each other, which they're still responsible for each other, and that's important. Low-income neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color have always had to do that. But now there is a new pathway that says, okay, well, we can intervene with the municipality. There actually are resources for us. We've always known that, but we haven't always known how to tap into it. So the residents are the ones bringing in the ideas that are elegant, that are wise, that are stable, that are lasting. They're the ones that are bringing in the community knowledge and expertise. And then it was just our job to help connect the pieces with them so that they could continue to do it. And so that resident group is actually still very active. The residents that we'd pull together, they're independent from us completely now and are working directly with the municipality on the implementation of the city's greening plan. So to go over a period of about 10 years from we don't want to talk to anybody in the city, we hate them, they hate us, they never do anything, to now them bringing their own folding chair to the table where decisions are being made is a pretty big change. And you know, just for the price of a couple trees, that's pretty good.
Maybe someday they'll be able to sit in an office chair or an upholstered chair at the table.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I'm
awesome.
getting there. Yeah.
You're describing ways that we can make change in our physical environment, in the built and natural environment, to improve community and to improve community resilience. You have many folks here today with the skills and the passions to make those changes through planning, design, construction, activism. What advice would you give us on how to affect change in these areas?
I think one of the things one of the reasons why I wrote this book generally is that I would talk to people at my kids' school, the barista who's making my coffee at the local coffee shop. And what I would constantly hear is I'm really overwhelmed by how big the scale of change that's needed is. The people would get overwhelmed with the idea of polar bears dying, but as they swam between ice flows, or the idea of the methane cycle in the Arctic ice kicking off, and people were experiencing this deep feeling of helplessness. And I think one of the things that cuts through that and allows you to see yourself engaging in more sustainable changes is three-pronged. One is to recognize, like, you are a small but important piece of it. You're never going to see the end of this work. It's multi-generational, but you do have a role to play. The second piece is, as folks who are educated in architecture, in design, in planning, you come with a certain skill set that can be very useful, but is not exhaustively useful to the populations that need them. So it's, I think, one of the things to get engaged in and to make change using the skills that you have is to find opportunities to recognize where you are not the expert and where other people know more than you do. In our work, we pay residents at least $15 an hour, a seat at the table, to tell us about their lived experience. I think it's really important for people in planning and architecture professions to find opportunities to engage residents on equal terms as experts. Not, I am coming to you and allowing you to participate because you live in the neighborhood that I'm doing work, but I cannot do this work without you, or the work will not be wise. The work will not be long lasting. You have to be here, and I'm going to find some way to show you that there's that expertise. And I think integrating what you hear from residents into how you organize not just the recommendations or designs that you give, but that sort of longer vision of how spaces are programmed, of what the maintenance looks like in these spaces, to find opportunities to integrate that resident expertise. And I think there's a lot of cities that are doing some really great work around that. Also in listening to both the concerns that residents have, but also the limitations I think that like municipalities have. I think there's some great examples actually in Kentucky of planners and architects that are doing that work around transferring like end of life pools into splash pads and misters. It's hot in Kentucky. It's getting hotter in Kentucky. And what in Louisville, what planners and municipal officials had been hearing from residents is like, we have a lot of folks who don't swim, but we have a lot of folks that are too hot, and we have a lot of folks that can't afford to cool themselves during the day. The municipality at the same time said, we can't do anything. Our infrastructure is crumbling. We have these old pools that are out of use. And so engaging with residents to better understand how to utilize that space ended up with the city taking advantage of the drainage. So it's the expertise that the architects could come in place with, taking the concerns and limitations of the municipality and the population that was there. We can't swim. It's hot. We can't create another pool, to create this really leading number of splash pads and play spaces that are wet and available intergenerationally and interability. So I think pulling residents as experts as much as you are as technocrats is a really important way to elevate the impact of your work and make it lasting.
I love that image. It's almost like, feels like a tribe. You're building a tribe. And it relates to your 3 guiding questions for community activism. You write in your book, who are my people? What is the change they need? Why has this change not yet come about? And can you describe why these are important to you? I think that's just so eye-opening in terms of your approach, and we'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So this framing, it has connections to, so I grew up in Queens, New York, and I feel like you can't grow up in Queens without living in a multi-ethnic and multi-religious family. And so that was my background and my experience. And so this has a dotted line to the 3 questions asked by Rabbi Hillel the elder. If I am not for myself, who is for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? If not now, when? And so I think there's a pretty clear connection between those 2, but this is a framework for looking outside of yourself and taking advantage of your human responsibility to care for and advocate for other people. And before I did climate work, when I was a younger person in college, when I was a teacher, I did a lot of community organizing work around labor and around housing. And at its core, that's what this book is. It's an organizing book. If you're overwhelmed and you don't know how to get started, how do you get involved? And so I think of these 3 questions of who are my people? What is the change they need? Why has that change not yet come about? Helps you to focus in and cut through the overwhelm, because there's a zillion issues that you could be concerned about. There's a zillion different pathways that you could take. There's a zillion different people you could work with or work by yourself. But asking those questions helps you to identify first who's in your coalition, who are the people that are concerned about the same issue you're concerned about, or who are working on the thing you want to work about. I think it's really important to say, like, what is the change they need, particularly as practitioners. I think sometimes you can come into a space where you have a really good sense of the problem, right? Like I had a sense of the flooding, and obviously it's a drainage solution. We should put a cistern in and blah, blah, blah. But understanding and having a deeper knowledge of what the people who are closest to the issue are experiencing helps you to think a little bit more broadly and openly and creatively about what the potential solutions are. And then why has that change not yet come about allows you to move from the individual to the systemic. So what are these big roadblocks that are holding it? The city is not picking up the phone. Residents are sick and tired of working with people from outside the community. The climate crisis is worsening, and it just allows you to really focus in on what can your locus of control be. So I like that framework, and whenever I'm feeling really overwhelmed, either in an organizing project or even planning, say like a stormwater park and the design elements of it and pulling people together for it, I like to run through that checklist of questions as a benchmark to say, am I living my values? Am I working with the people who I want to work with? And am I prioritizing those closest to the issue? So I think of that as like just a really quick way to make sure that I'm still on track.
Awesome. There's another rabbinical quote from the Talmud too that says, Rabbi Tarfon's time, who said, "You are not free to stop doing work to change the world, but neither are you expected to finish it.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to keep on going, keep on doing."
It is. And I think that was one of the hardest things to make peace with. I think when I was a young, ready to take on the world kind of person, we want to fix it and you want it to be closed. And a lot of people I think who are high achievers love the dopamine hit you get off the checklist, right? Like you cross that thing off your to-do list and you're feeling so good. And it takes, I think, a lot of spiritual growth to realize that you are just one of a long line of people who are going to be working on this and you're never going to see the end of it. And it's very difficult to make peace with that, but I highly recommend wrestling with that. It's not to undercut your contribution, but to solidify in your mind your role as a future ancestor, your role as someone who has set the deck for other people to be able to continue that world. And then I think also removes that responsibility that things should be done and dusted. Like you're not going to get a full spectrum dopamine hit off of anything related to the climate crisis, I think, but you can get little bits and pieces of it.
You're part of the chain.
Yeah, absolutely. We all are.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things you tackle in your book is about fighting for change of how resources are allocated within community budgets and policies. And this is not a task for the faint of heart. And what advice would you offer on how to do this effectively?
I think that last question of why has that change not yet come about is really important to understanding systems change. So I'll go back to that example in Richmond, Virginia, where Richmond, like many cities with a history of segregation, has a very inequitable distribution of municipal resources. Actually, even close by, Rhode Island is like that. Rhode Island has neighborhoods, the bedroom communities outside of Providence, where these small cities like Pawtucket and Central Falls didn't put like sewer connections and drainage into lower income neighborhoods. So just I think the idea being that these neighborhoods that didn't have political power, these neighborhoods that did not have pay a ton of money into the tax coffers, that didn't have relationships to city councilors or municipal officials were often left behind. So those neighborhoods flood more. In Virginia, same thing, but also with where trees are allocated, where parks are sited. And over time, we discovered that one of the blockades to that is that there was nothing in the there's nothing that was put into law. There was nothing that was put into practice for how resources were distributed to get money to where people needed it most, to get resources to where there were no drainage or no trees. And so that group of residents that I had mentioned, one of the things that they came around about is they said, like, hey, we see the budget. The budget's very transparent. We know how much money is going to the city. You can look that up on the website. But how is it flowing and how come it's not getting to us? And so during the Richmond 300 master planning process, residents came together to pen some language to be put into that master planning process that prioritizes specifically for tree canopy distribution, that the city put those dollars and put those trees into neighborhoods that have a low amount of tree canopy, right? Like, duh, that makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that we had no idea was coming is, when Biden was elected and the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, that all of a sudden created a bunch of money that could flow from the federal government to cities and states, and then from the city into the neighborhood. And there was a block that was not forcing the city to prioritize these neighborhoods. So money was just kind of getting routed wherever anybody wanted it to. So I think understanding the chain of the way in which resources are distributed is something that can be complicated, but I think is worth the effort. Working with your city councilor is like one way to do that. You can't necessarily knock on the door of City Hall and talk to the person who's in charge of it, but there are people who in theory report to you, who in theory represent you, that should be able to help walk you through that to better understand the ways in which resources are distributed. And I think for architects and planners, you might say like, that's like not really, maybe as a community member, but that's not really my job as a practitioner necessarily. But when you think about long-term maintenance of a physical space or long-term programming of a physical space, it's important to understand like what are the limitations of resources that flow through. So I think pulling community activists and city councilors and municipal officials to the table, even if you're working on parcels that are quasi-public, that are public, even that are private, to understand how these resources flow, what money is available, can help you to make wiser design and planning decisions.
Thank you from all the architects and planners in the room. But how can we as architects and planners, when we see these kinds of environmental injustices, kind of more research, quantify, document those inequities to advocate more successfully?
I'm a huge fan of community science. And some of you might say like, hey, I'm not really a science person. I'm not a math person. I think everybody is. If you've ever walked down one side of the street over another because one side was hotter, like you're collecting science on what area is hot and which area is cooler. And so I think as practitioners, pulling the community together to engage in community science is a really great way to get on the ground data that you actually can't get in other ways. I'm sure a lot of you guys have experience with GIS or have used GIS or go to your GIS person for help if you're not proficient in the software. But there's limits to what that data is. So a lot of the data that you get for things like heat or tree canopy cover or flooding are collected from two satellites in space, Landsat 8 and Landsat 9. They were put up by NASA. They're zooming around, taking pictures of the entire Earth. And we use a lot of those to better understand the built environment. And that for a long time has been the data that we've used. But because of the 30 by 30 meter area that those satellites are taking images of, you're kind of limited as to how detailed your experience of the built environment is. And if you've ever walked through a neighborhood and have had to cross an intersection that just has a really annoying puddle in it, or like even when it snows in Boston, it's just like really wet, and you're like, how do I get through this slush bank? That's never going to be captured by satellite, but that sort of stuff can be captured by people. So engaging with residents to collect data, and that can be as simple as how many trees are on this block that are dead, or where is there a puddle that is annoying, can help to get you that micro level data that can help you to make better decisions about how to plan or design for the reality of a space. The same thing is true of temperature, where you can't get great temperature readings from space because you're really only getting land surface temperature. But air quality monitors, which cost like $30, that's not a huge investment really, and they last for a very long time. And doing walk audits of spaces using these air temperature monitors, or there are these really cool ones that are about the size of a Pez dispenser now that you can just keep in your pocket. And it takes ambient air temperature, which is the experience of being, not just how hot the ground is, but the humidity and the temperature, can help to get you much better information about a space. Pairing that with lived experience gives you a whole new level of data that I think is a lot more useful and usable than some of the data that you can get either through just one quick walk through the parcel or through using that GIS data. So I'm a huge fan of community science. I'm happy to talk with anyone afterwards about like really cheap and easy ways to leverage relationships with universities or to do it yourself. It's really expensive, it's really inexpensive, and I think gives you a whole new perspective on a built space. And my God, residents are so excited about it because there's proof in their hands finally when they look and say, I told you that this bus stop was unbearable. I told you that this part of our community was flooding, and putting a stormwater park here would be really useful. So the vindication and pride that community members feel, I think, gives them a lot more power to engage in these types of conversations that are often have historically felt very inaccessible to them. So I think community science is good for everyone. And then you get to play with like a cool thing that sends data to your phone, and that's also just fun.
And it's so empowering.
Yeah.
Like to just be able to document that and say, told you so.
Yeah, and one of the things I love about it too is that it removes, so it's my opinion that in our culture, and when I say ours, I just mean dominant American culture, we don't have like a great template for talking about class and race. We're not great at it as a society. There's a lot that we still have to do, but this type of data, especially when it's collected from residents, that's the language that decision makers speak. And it can serve for as a platform for conversations about equity without having to wade into the types of conversations that we're kind of crappy at as a dominant culture. So you can have conversations about, well, why is this part of the city, which is mostly Latino, 30 degrees Fahrenheit hotter on the same summer day than this other area that's richer and whiter. And instead of talking about this party versus that party, this administration versus that administration, we now talk about this is our city. And there is a huge disparity here. We have the data for it related to the built environment. How can we work together to change? And that's, I think, one of the things that's been most surprising to me about my work at Groundwork is that this data, both ones that technocrats and people with skills and planning and architecture and GIS and data analysis can provide, but also that which residents can provide paired with their lived experience, it can really move the needle when you're talking to decision makers, where the city councilors and the mayors can avoid that kind of like knee reaction of people coming and saying something, instead you present the data and they can't look away from that data. They can't really turn away from it. Like, why is it 32 degrees hotter on this side of town than the other? And that opens up a new type of conversation and a new pathway to resolution. So I've been very surprised about that. And I don't say that to discount the importance of having those really important conversations. Like, we do need to figure out how to talk about race and class in our culture. But people also should not have to wait if they're electricity is going out because it's so hot in their neighborhood, or their basements are flooding. Like, they shouldn't have to wait for us to achieve a high level of competency before they get changed. So I think it's kind of, by any means necessary, and this is one of the means.
In addition to the satisfaction of making social change, one of the themes in your book is really joy, and the joy of being able to take action, building connections with others in your neighborhood and in your community, and in the work itself of planting a community garden or a microforest, of working to transform your streets together. So I wanted to ask you about joy, but I also wanted to ask, how is joy a more powerful motivator than guilt or grief?
Yeah, I think guilt and grief are slow individual feelings. You can connect with people about it if you have the language and capacity and time to. But I think of joy as only being able to be experienced collectively. I think you can experience happiness very individually, but joy, which I think of as a longer lasting feeling, is a deeper connection to others. And when I say others, I usually mean other people, but I also think about it as your relationship to the change in the natural environment. I live just in Somerville in Porter Square, and right along my street, Somerville Avenue, all of the trees were dead for about a half mile. And I just moved to the neighborhood. I have an 8-year-old and soon to be a new person, but was biking my 8-year-old to Cambridge for daycare. And in the summer, it was just so hot. I'm kind of sweat a lot as a person generally, but whenever I was waiting at the stoplight, I was just like pouring sweat. And I was like, why are there no trees? And 15 seconds later, I would turn the corner into Cambridge with this really beautiful and dense tree canopy cover. Like, what is happening? So I reached out to this a person who is the urban forester for the city of Somerville. And she said, yeah, we think there's a gas leak. It smothered all the roots of the trees. What you going to do? We can't replant until the gas company fixes it. And I said, well, this is ridiculous. And I learned that the Department of Transportation is in charge of the sidewalk, which is over the gas line. The forestry department's in charge of the trees. Eversource is in charge of the gas pipes underneath. And then a different department's in charge of the street where the main pipe is. So you've now got like these 4 entities and 4 agencies to try and corral, none of whom can take culpability. And so I was able to connect with a bunch of folks, primarily mothers, and then other people in my neighborhood to try and get that gas leak fixed. Long story short, it's fixed. If you go down Somerville Avenue now, it took about 2.5 years, but you're going to see these trees that are doing their best and they're alive, and this is their 3rd year, and they're going to eventually produce some good shade. But I say that to say that I feel so much joy and connection to all of the people that I worked with, and the deepening of my connection to community every time I run into someone who helped out with a petition, or who went with us to City Hall, or who did the walk with us on Eversource. It's a continued feeling of emotion and connection to all of the people that helped to make this possible. And so I get that reminder and that jolt of joy every time I see the trees, which is every day, because I leave my house every day. It's every time I connect with one of those other people. It's every time I see people or hear from people reaching out to me on another part of town where all the trees are dead. And so I think joy is the sustained connection with other humans. And that's really motivating and addicting and lasting in its own way. Whereas anger, which I think can be an important and powerful motivator, is something that kind of sputters out. Like eventually you get too tired to continue to be angry. Have you ever been too tired to engage in joy? I don't think so. So I think it's something that's a little
Never.
right? It's a little more stable and lasting. And I think that chasing that that connection, that connectivity, that long-lasting feeling of accomplishment, I think can be a lot more motivating than some of these more energy-demanding feelings like anger or grief.
Actually, thank you. I think it's a great note to open it up for questions from our audience. Any questions about joy versus grief versus guilt?
Zoom. Thank you. Appreciate all your stories. So the first question that I had was about, trying to get the community's trust. And you mentioned that when you were speaking about Virginia. And so could you just maybe talk about like ways that you can build trust with communities, especially like EJ communities that have historical trust issues with the government? Like what are some methods that you feel are like best that you can partner with these communities and gain their trust to be able to do the work when they've been historically oppressed?
I think that, remember when I said I worked for government and I got frustrated because it was so slow? It turns out relationship building is like a lot slower than that even. And so I kind of learned my lesson that you can't escape the need for things to go slow. So longstanding relationship building with community members is important because they want to know that you're not just parachuting in and then parachuting out. I think places that, especially those that have long histories of natural disasters, I'm thinking like parts of California, I'm thinking New Orleans, where there's an attractiveness to planners and charities, et cetera, like dropping in, maybe studying the heck out of them and then leaving is really exhaustive. And so there's a couple of core values that when I'm leading this work or when I'm participating in this work, I think are important. One is engaging in shared leadership and decision making. It's my job to bring resources, information, and when I can, money. It's the residents' responsibility to make decisions about their community and their built environment and what they would and wouldn't like to see. And so I think that, when we went there, we were really trying to talk about heat as a primary issue because that's what our funder was trying to, pay us to be able to do. But residents were really concerned about traffic. And so instead we said, well, that is what you're concerned about. And honestly, if I were pulling my kindergartner across this street that had just cars like zooming through like 75 miles an hour right across a residential street, I would be really scared too. There's no stop sign, there's no stoplight. So putting our energy into that helped to build trust because we were not forcing our agenda, our topic, or our issue. We said, well, and we were lucky, thank goodness enough, this is funded by the Kresge Foundation, to have a funder who was going to stick with us for a couple of years. So we had the ability to be slow like that. So I think engaging in shared leadership and decision making, meeting people where they are. So going out into community and being a physical presence. I'm sure all of us have heard of and have had to miss the 10 a.m. on a Tuesday community planning meeting that is talking about that thing you care about, but you got a job to go to or you got to take care of your kids. So making sure you're meeting people where they are. So we do a lot of door knocking. We're in community. We're showing up at community events. And being there physically, and then understanding that it's going to be a slow process and people probably are not going to trust you. So find and start to build with relationships with people who can then be those community connectors to then connect you to other folks that are working with them. So that's kind of the strategy that we take. and just again, an overlay of patience that people have a really good reason not to trust you. And you need to show them a million times over that you're listening, you're acting on their best behalf, and you're there not for your own agenda necessarily, but to support them in bringing the vision that they already have for their communities to life. I think that's something that people underestimate, particularly about low-income communities, is that people are so stressed out with like the day-to-day living of trying to make ends meet that they have no room for anything else. Yeah, that's sort of true. But like if your kid can't play outside because their asthma gets aggravated, like that's regardless of your income level, that's an issue you're going to pay attention to. If you are an elder who can't afford your medication because you need to keep your house cool, like that woman in Virginia, that's an economic issue, but it's also a climate issue. So making sure that you can be understanding of the intersectionality of those different types of issues and can speak to people where their primary concerns are before then making the connection to whatever you're actually there for. Yeah. You had another question too. I hope that was helpful. Well, I was so lucky that I got to leave that project, which I know is not able to do it. One of the programs that we run is a Brownfields Technical Assistance Program. It's free. So if you know of any communities that are dealing with brownfield issues, you can send them to us at Groundwork USA. But it was in Appalachia in Western Virginia, and it was this old rail trail. Hey, that sounds great. I like a rail trail. And they were interested in turning it into a tourist destination for recreation. I love recreation. That's great. Oh, kayak launch into the water. That sounds fantastic. Hiking trails, bird watching. They said, we can help you with this. This is great. And they were really interested in how do we do this in a way that is budget conscious? Because Western Appalachia, not known for having a ton of money, right? Also on board with that. We work with primarily communities that have histories of industry and boom and bust cycles. But what the there's a couple counties that were working together on this, were interested in was using labor from an opioid diversion program. So using free labor from an opioid diversion program to build out parts of the rail trail. So instead of going to jail for your heroin/oxy addiction, you would then participate in building out the rail trail and working with the hazardous materials on a brownfield site. So there's lots of folks that I think you get like 80% of the way there, but then, that 20% is just not workable. So we were lucky enough to say, like, actually, we think this project's not a great fit. We're happy to help you with the other components, but, a jail diversion program where you take vulnerable people who need addiction treatment and instead put them to work to avoid prison is pretty messed up. And it's a surprising number of communities that I've run into over the years where they have that as like their big idea of just like, let's go back to a version of enslavement. That sounds cool. So.
Thank you for the overall presentation. It was great. So the title of your book, Climate Action for Busy People, I was interested in hearing a little bit about some of the things for busy people, like specifically for, everyone's busy these days with, everything from elder care to child care to working and just getting by broadly. So do you have some sort of specifics in which you've come up with some either quick wins or low effort ways of beginning the conversation and engaging more broadly in this really sort of tough, long scale, big picture item, which is climate change and climate action?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I'm a big believer in hyper-local work. I don't believe anyone from the federal government is coming in on a white horse to save us. I think the same is also not true of the state or the city. So I'm very focused on the neighborhood level, both in my work and then in my day-to-day life. So the middle third of the book is focused on what can you do if you have anything from 5 minutes to an hour on a Saturday, just to keep your neighborhood safe. So this is not big systemic change for the state of Massachusetts. This is what do we do on your block? And little things like keeping an old milk jug container on your porch. During extreme heat events, it's really stressful for trees, and mature trees are valuable in a couple ways. One, they soak up rainwater, helping keep our neighborhoods from flooding. Two, they provide shade. But third, they also engage in evapotranspiration. They act as like little air conditioners and release. They're able to absorb the heat and use that to evaporate the water from their leaves. So keeping these trees really healthy is important. So if for any tree that is the rule of thumb is about a gallon of water per inch in diameter of each tree during extreme heat events to help them. Think about like the size of an oatmeal can. If it's the size of an oatmeal can, you want to try and get 2 to 3 of those, like the slimmer versions of Quaker Oats. You want to try to get like 2 or 3 of those gallons of water during days that are 90 or above. But even just doing one is fine. So just keep it on your porch. I keep it on my porch. I go around to the side of the house, just fill it from the hose. I glug it into the tree well, and then I actually just hurl it over the porch railing onto the porch. So that's like one small thing that you can do. I think talking to your neighbors and getting to know them is also something that's very important from a resilience standpoint, because the time to build relationships is not when there's an emergency, it's beforehand. So checking in and just making some small talk, learning what your neighbor's name is, because then when it's 95 degrees, I can check in on Mary. She just turned 92 this April. She lives across the street from me, and I can just check in on her and see that she's okay. And that's a means of resilience. Or working with your city to set up a block party. Another one that I like, because I have a now 8-year-old, but it's something that's really easy to do with kids, is clearing out storm drains. Most cities have street sweepers that come through, but dirt and trash and leaves get compacted in these storm drains. And during extreme rain or precipitation events, or even when just a lot of snow is melting at the end of the season here in Boston, that water can end up in people's basements. And so to create a pathway to the street, like just grabbing a stick that you find, or really whatever you can do just to poke the dirt clots out, or use your rain boot to scoop kind of downhill from the storm drain, any of that debris or garbage or leaves, if you don't want to touch it, is a way to help keep a neighborhood safe from flooding. So I've got a bunch of those types of tips in the books, just like what can you do if you only have a couple minutes, and then the rest of your time is working and elder care and childcare and staying hydrated and getting your cardio in and trying to be whimsical and all that sort of stuff. So there's also, for very busy people in the library, you can get the audio book. It's 5 hours. It's real fast if you're too busy to read. Yeah. There you go.
I had a question. So in climate action and just like community work in general, it's very easy for people to get jaded and overwhelmed after a while. And like you mentioned earlier about from an organizing standpoint, and like the book covers from an organizing standpoint, but also from a participant standpoint. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on what you think is the best way to reignite the jaded people from an organizing standpoint, and from a participant standpoint, how do you get past that jaded feeling in order to take action again? Because even if 5 minutes, sometimes you're too jaded to even do the 5 minutes. So how do you get back the motivation to keep doing the work? And from an organizing standpoint, how do you help people get past that jaded mindset?
I think from people are so one of the things that's very common to talk about in the United States is that we're lonely. That seems to be what people study, that and that actually ends up breaking down differently along class lines. Just wealthier, whiter people are lonelier than lower income people of color, but across the nation in general, we're known as more and more of a lonely people. And so I think community connection is one of the ways to get by that jadedness, because you are now making an effort to not be so alone. How do you do that? And how do you do that in the community level? One is organizing block parties if you can, if you're that type of person. A lot of cities like Somerville, for example, will give you $500 to throw a block party with you and your neighbors. If that's too much, because it does sound like a lot of work, right? Like showing up to one is also helpful, finding ones that are adjacent to your neighborhood to start building these relationships and connections with people who are there. Bring a bag of chips. That's kind of it. Or inviting the people in your community to do one of those really small tasks with you. So just calling up a friend and saying like, hey, I'm kind of stressed out. I would just like to go for a walk, and I'm going to bring a trash bag, and we're going to pick up a couple pieces of garbage from the tree wells to help nutrients and water passed down better. So creating opportunities to pet two cats with one hand, connect with another human being and connect with them over doing something as compared to, sitting and getting a cup of coffee. Maybe on the way to getting that coffee, you make the commitment with the person like, hey, let's just kick some trash out of a storm drain. And so I think that it's hard to fully get over the jadedness because there's a lot to make you jaded. But I think recognizing that there are things within your locus of control, and then pushing yourself to do one of those really small things proves to you that there is something in your locus of control. Can you solve the climate crisis? No, but you can get a piece of trash out. And then every time you pass that tree well, it's clean, and that's because of me. And you can get that sense of self-satisfaction. And I think we need that. I think a lot of us, especially who are office workers, who are doing a lot of stuff I have a colleague who calls us keyboard warriors, who are out there like trying to change the world with our, with GIS and CAD and all of these tools that we have. We can sometimes feel divorced from what it feels like to create and to change. And so taking the time to make one piece of change or one small creation, I think can chip away at that jadedness because all of a sudden something's in your locus of control. Stephen Miller is not going to come mess with your tree box, right? Like that's your tree box. Like he's going to cause this chaos, but you do have control over this tree box. So I think making the effort to find something that you can have control over and contribute to pays dividends. Like the endorphin high, again, that I get from seeing those trees planted in it's lasted for far longer than it probably should have at this point, but I'm going to keep riding it and keep feeling good about it.
I was also intrigued by the title of the book, and I was just wondering if you could share any other sort of like takeaways or themes from the book with us while we have you here.
Yeah. One of the things I think is so important to recognize is that change is possible. I think that's the big message of this book is it's important to understand why do our communities look the way that they do. That's the first third of the book, because that allows us to understand that someone somewhere made a decision to do this. Someone decided to not put storm drains there or to plant a beautiful microforest somewhere else. And so the world is changeable. And I think a lot of folks, especially over the last 10 years or so, it's been a real rough 10 years, have had this feeling of a loss of control and a loss of ability to intervene because it feels as though things are the way that they always are, right? Chauncey Street has always been here, right? In your memory, but it looked very different 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago. So I think recognizing that things can change, that the pace of change can be slow, but it is possible and it happens, or something I think that's just really important to maintaining hope and being able to connect to that joy. So my biggest goal with this book was you don't have a lot of time as a human being. Maybe you have a case of the climate bubble guts where you're feeling real anxious about the direction the world's going in. What are the small 1% solutions you can contribute to? Because there is no 100% solution and you got to get that out of your head. But with enough 1% solutions, we can start to tip the scales towards something that's a little bit better.
I was just saying thank you, that we feel a lot of gratitude for your words. And as a reminder, this event is part of the Resilient Futures series of the Hideo Sasaki Foundation. And their theme this year is Resilient Futures. So all about community resilience as well. Connecting design and community-driven action. So keep an eye out for future events. There's the monthly newsletter of the foundation, and make sure you don't miss out on the next ones. But thank you.
Thanks, everyone.